Just this week, Insomniac shared another glimpse at the latest Ratchet and Clank game, Rift Apart. This is their first true exclusive for PlayStation 5, having come off of the beautiful Spider-Man Miles Morales, released at the launch of the system, and I thought we would check out the trailer and discuss some of the visual niceties on display. So, as we did with Spider-Man, I brought along Alex Battaglia to talk about it.
Hey there, John. This game uses ray tracing. I gotta be here.
Exactly. There are rays being traced, and thus it's a requirement that you join us here to discuss it. So, we're going to talk about the ray tracing, of course, but also, take a look at the different environments, because there's a lot of areas shown in this specific demo that really kind of gives us an idea of where they're going with the game. There's a lot of great effects and particles and just tons of detail, and yeah, there's a lot to see. It's a beautiful looking game. So I would say what we're going to do is kind of walk through the trailer, starting kind of at the beginning, and just kind of comment on what we see, essentially. So yeah, what do you say, Alex? Shall we get started?
Let's do it.
All right, let's go. So I guess, it just kicks off with this nice cutscene with Rivet, and it's the new character. And what I love here is, it's showing all these close-ups. You got the ray traced Clank there on the table.
Yeah.
But then, Insomniac is really good with cutscenes. The animation work is excellent. There's a lot of stuff happening, like so many individual objects that are kind of moving around the scene. It really does sort of have this pre-rendered look in a way. Like, it looks like a cartoon.
I'd say Insomniac games, in terms of this kind of stylized rendering, they've gotten the closest to kind of the pre-rendered look in terms of animation quality.
Oh, and if we pause right there, I like this. She's jumping up to attack this guy, and you can actually see the reflection of her in his visor.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
Nice transparent helmet thing there.
Transparency reflections, which is something that we also saw in Spider-Man as well, Spider-Man Miles Morales, and of course now in this game. So getting into that kind of ray tracing, which we also see in this scene coming up here as our titular hero wakes up on the ground. You can see all those nice ray trace reflections here. From watching this trailer, we don't see kind of any added features over what we saw in Spider-Man or Spider-Man Miles Morales, but it's still, in this environment, especially this kind of cyberpunk dystopia, it really shows it off really well. I think in the end here, and John and I were talking about this right before we started the video, that any of the compromises you might have seen in Spider-Man will be a lot less obvious in this game, just because the art style is pretty different.
Like, you could see it, right? If we pause right there, right as he stands up and it shows the objective thing, you can see the little cylinder that's next to him. It's a lower polygon mesh on the ground there in the reflection. So it's basically like they did in Spider-Man Miles Morales, where they traced into a lower detail model, essentially. And this is a great way, but they at least in Spider-Man, they would trace the rays out to the horizon. So you get the full scene reflected, as you would hope, and it looks great. But if you look really closely, you'll spot some of those nips and tucks made. But I do think that it will be a lot less obvious this time, just due to the nature of the world that this game takes place in. Instead of like Spider-Man, where you have all those glass surfaces that just reflect in all directions. So, but anyway, let's continue here. So,
I guess another thing that I kind of want to mention is, and it goes back to the original cutscene that starts this with Rivet, is Spider-Man, especially Miles Morales, added in their kind of spline-based GPU hair, like the way the hair's done. And I would not be surprised if that is the technology being used to drive the fur here on our main character, as well as on Rivet, and it's looking really great.
I like that because
I really like the hair.
They've been doing kind of different fur shading techniques with each generation since PlayStation 3, and this new the spline based hair that they introduced in Miles Morales was really nice, and I think it is definitely in use here based on the quality of it here. Just look at that when he goes up the elevator. Like it doesn't have that typical shell texture look either. So
no, it doesn't.
Okay. And another thing that really kind of just stands out throughout this environment is it is a cartoony game, but each of the objects in the world, there's just a ton of geometry in them. Like the cityscape, when it's looking out, there's all these little tiny objects, and if you actually look closely at the ground, like everything's still filled in, like the LODs aren't aggressive in any way, really.
Yeah, they're definitely not. It's getting over to that kind of, I mean, they're not using it yet, but we're getting very close to like 1 polygon per pixel, even without using like special rendering techniques here.
Exactly.
It's just they're culling and doing everything very right to where you don't really see the edges on things anymore, and they could build these really, really dense kind of geometric meshes where it just looks kind of really great. I don't know how to say it.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of stuff. If you just look at, like, there's all these little circular metal things used all over the place and stuff like that are fully modeled objects now. Like, for a while that would have just been normal maps, but now they're combining that with these full polygon models to create even more sense of detail in it, to the point where it's actually a little bit tricky to actually see visible triangle edges on many of these objects. So it really does bring us closer to that cinematic look. Like, it kind of looks, in some ways, it kind of looks better than the actual movie that came out for Ratchet and Clank. Like, obviously, that's still probably going to have the higher geometry budget, offline rendering. But the techniques used here just look really good.
Yeah, I think the post-processing is also another thing that really amplifies this to look as filmic as it does. We've talked about it before with Insomniac games, but they have a really, really wonderful motion blur implementation. And then on top of that, and it's much more evident in this game than it would have been in Spider-Man, is that they kind of bend and morph the models as they move. They're not just, they're kind of like deforming as they move to emphasize their movement. This plus the motion blur makes it look more, I would say, hand animated in a certain way.
Yeah, they're kind of going crazy with the blend shapes, I guess. And it just, all that, the stretch and squash kind of effect. It looks really, really good. Oh, and so then he does that little slow walking scene after the vendor, and you kind of get another glimpse of the city.
Yeah.
Man, I like this. There's also kind of that fog. Yeah, exactly. I was just going to say that. The distance fog everywhere. It's very thick, and it sort of gives it that light pollution that you would hope from a large metropolis at night, especially one in the rain.
Yes.
So it's pretty. This is a very atmospheric kind of area.
It is pretty interesting. I do wonder from a gameplay perspective, because I mean we're only being shown like a single path through this. I actually don't know how it's if there is a single path through it or if there's multiple paths. I don't actually know.
I saw some lit smoke there from the side.
Oh yeah.
So Ratchet and Clank games. So the structure has always been where you essentially pilot a craft around by selecting. You don't actually usually pilot. You select different planets, right? And each planet tends to be a pretty wide open space, almost like a hub. So there's challenges and actual places you go through in a linear fashion, but you often circle back around and kind of like make your way through these spaces. And it looks like they've kind of expanded the size of the worlds here. This seems more complex and more densely populated than we've seen previously. I'm curious about that. I like, by the way, that electronic tree that was down there.
Yes, that is very funny.
It's like a projected hologram tree.
That's very sci-fi future stuff. I do like the art style of this area quite a bit.
All those LED billboards everywhere too. Those are cool. I mean, that would be a great use case for ray traced global illumination, but that's probably a little bit too much
to ask for. Yeah, that's kind of like the one thing that's bridging, or that is still the gap between this and like a pre-rendered movie, is that in a lot of areas in a pre-rendered movie, like this pink slime here, so like that would be a light source in a pre-rendered movie. So, and here it's just a surface that has a color that kind of is always a certain level of brightness. It doesn't actually spread light around the environment. That's like the one thing that's probably getting in the way of this looking just like the movie. That's really about it. It's very impressive.
Yeah, and obviously that's something. Oh yeah, here we go. This we were talking earlier, and yeah, they kind of show off two types of portals in this demo. That's kind of neat to see. It looks like in this type, when you aim towards one of these portals, it turns orange, and then if you trigger it, it essentially pulls you over there very rapidly, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's a bit meat hook from Doom, or
exactly.
I guess Bionic Commando style kind of.
And then we'll see the other one momentarily, but I did want to say whenever he aims his weapon, sort of the ADS, if you will, of this game. They use this really nice depth of field.
It does look really good. There's two things in the scene that I really like is the pitter patter of the rain on the ground. Like each little bit leaves a tiny little a sprinkle, I would say, like little. There's tons of them. There's tons of them around the camera, and also when these kind of heavy troopers smash the ground, they leave what looks like either a geometric or palm decal on the ground there that slowly fades into like a normal map one, but it looks really awesome when it hits initially.
Yeah, I like those. Those are great. I also like how you mentioned the rain, but it correctly falls, so like when you're undercover, you don't see it. And it's a minor thing, but I think it's important to get right in terms of creating realistic rain.
Yeah, that is very true.
Okay, now this is first little boss fight. So it's showing some more pyrotechnics, of course, but this is where we're going to get a glimpse of the sort of SSD features being shown off here, where they basically move to a different map through the portal. So
this is in terms of games we've seen coming out this night. Like there's like the portal mode,
exactly, very small little loading thing. Portal does just kind of pop up, but then it drops you out into this other world, and that is really cool, I have to say. That
is very cool. I think in terms of games that have come out this gen, though, other than games loading a lot quicker, like we saw in Marvel's Avengers, which was like
this looks good.
4 seconds, 4 seconds. Yeah, this is a nice crash sequence. This is like one of the first ones that is, I guess, using it more for a kind of traversal mechanic, rather than straight loading. So it is actually traversing something.
Exactly.
With the SSD.
And by the way, I also appreciate the ray trace reflections on that ship there. That's nice. Oh, yeah. Nice. Then, of course, we have the sun rays, the crepuscular rays. I'm always a fan of that.
One thing you were mentioning before we started kind of talking here for this video was that you think the natural environments are quite a bit better this time around.
Yeah, they are.
You were just kind of describing how like the amount of geometric detail, especially on the ground, is so much higher now than it was in previous Ratchet and Clank games. Even the last one on
was pretty
PlayStation
good.
4. So like this is like quite a nice advancement over the previous.
The trees, the ground itself, the lighting, of course, huge boost over the over the most recent PlayStation 4 one, which still looks great. If we actually look at the original, then
that's a big difference.
A little bit of a leap. The water reflection here when she goes up to this little vendor there was interesting. I guess it's probably simulating sort of like a mucky, muddy kind of water, so the reflection isn't. It's very shallow, but I couldn't tell if it's
hard to see
if it was SSR there, which would be.
It did look SSR-ish when it zoomed in, like you could see it like disappearing as it ran in.
It's not impossible that they could use SSR in some scenes. I guess I'm not sure why though. That would be really weird.
It's hard to say. I mean, some things like they have a great level of control on a per level load basis of what they want to turn on and off. I mean, it's a console game, they can turn off things if they need to. So, I mean, maybe in a level like this, they would this is not saying that's what they're doing, but it's just an example like, there's a whole bunch of transparent geometry here, like that we need to trace through. Maybe we'll just turn it off right here so we don't ruin the frame rate. That's like one thing a console developer could do.
Also, rewinding there real quick, you again caught the lit smoke particles from those things as they jet off, but they go from sunlight into shadow and then back out into sun. And I'm always a fan of that when you have smoke trails that kind of move through shadowed regions.
I love that
properly
too.
Represented. And then there's this topiary gun.
This is I had trouble understanding what he was describing when the narrator was describing how it works. I was like, what?
Dude, it's Ratchet and Clank. That's what it's about. Like super weird. Yeah.
Getting those Armed and Dangerous vibes here, I guess. So this is an interesting when they get over to the second rift here with the pocket dimension. This is kind of following a similar line, I think, in terms of how they're doing it. I don't think it's like the same as when they load a new stage entirely. Like when they showed off coming to this kind of prehistoric stage, where I feel like this is like the same stage's assets, but rearranged as like a new map location with different lighting. I don't know how to explain it.
I guess it kind of doesn't really matter one way or another, but although I guess
I was just thinking like the technical way.
The transition is slightly different. That's right. It doesn't have
that's what I was thinking.
That load.
Yeah, it doesn't have the.
They use the
load
word
screen.
loading in this, so I say it's fair to say it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because like they wouldn't. Yeah, it's not instantaneous. It's
No.
nigh instantaneous. So it seems like there's like those two different types. There's like the full load one, and then the one where it almost opens up a portal that you can see the other side of already before you get there.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see how this is organized within the world space. Like, is this just like part of the map that's kind of already loaded in memory? Or is it just like, it's reusing most of the same assets that they can just pop over there quickly? Or
yeah, it is interesting because when if you look at the surface of the portal, you can already see the area on the other side.
That's
with
true.
Shadow maps and everything already there. So it's probably already sitting in main memory at that point, and then they have a projection of it, like RTT maybe in. I don't know. We'd have to get like a really close-up shot to see what the heck it's doing.
Obviously, when the game ships, we'll have a much more detailed, scripted look at the game. This is just a preview, but I love this part by the way, where she's like riding this weird beetle creature.
Bug? Yeah.
Yeah, bug. There's a lot of really nice indirect lighting in this scene. Obviously lit by their probably their probe system, I'd say. And then I like that there's like a point light applied to that creature as you enter the cave before she comes out into this area, which I thought looked
pulling
cool.
the light around. Yeah.
And then here we are, another cutscene
with these very silly looking characters. My goodness.
The animation work here is really good. Like they've always been good at that, but it's just like the problem is sometimes when you see these games and you look at the animation in a cartoony style game and cutscenes, and you actually sometimes get the impression that you're looking at a character in a suit. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like wearing like a motion capture suit, and it's like this big awkward suit moving around that's meant to represent animation for these characters. And I don't get that feeling here. Like it feels very carefully animated to look correct for their size and proportions. I think that's really important for this kind of visual style.
I do really wonder how they do some of the animation for this game. It'd be nice if there was some behind the scenes kind of information about that more readily, because it's not like they're mocapping people. I don't think.
Well, for some games in this kind of cartoony style, they actually do use motion capture animation data, and that's exactly what creates that like person in a suit look. Because they don't move the way that you would think. But here, they do feel correct, I guess, given their proportions.
Yeah, they definitely do.
Also, in general, I like the way they do the tail and the ears kind of bobbing around just during normal gameplay.
Or like here, where they're like hyper accelerating and they're flapping. Very cool.
Also, the explosions were really good in that last scene. And then, okay, here's where we get some more just... They're kind of discussing other features in the game, I guess, and showcase a lot of different environments. Too many to even comment on, but it's cool to see all the potential stuff in here.
Yeah, it should be really interesting to see when the game comes out, because they're obviously not showing off a number of environmental types for story reasons. So it'd be interesting to see how they kind of push it even further. And one thing I really like about this photo mode they show off later is that you can place point lights.
Oh, I know. I can't believe I love that.
Usually that's not something that is done, so that's really nice to see.
And also their accessibility options. We talked about that on the DF Weekly recently, and it looks like they've gone like super far this time.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
I'll be curious to actually explore those options and see what's going on there. And these last few shots, that place, it looks like Rage, doesn't it?
That's all I could think of when I saw it. It's literally the fly through from the Rage trailer.
That's really cool.
2020, was it 2006, 2007 when that came out?
Exactly.
2008, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, Ratchet and Clank has always been a showpiece from Insomniac games. I remember when we discovered that Ratchet and Clank on PS3, the 60 frames per second one had parallax occlusion maps, and we were like, what?
Good day. That was a good day.
But, and this one, yeah, I mean, this looks to me like they're pushing the visuals up further. Like, this is absolutely unbelievable. And based on what they've said before, there should be a 60 frames per second mode.
That's
as
what
well.
I was just about to mention. Yeah.
I think that's been placed out there, and so I guess what we don't know is if they'll be able to do a 60 frames per second plus ray tracing mode like they patched in with Miles Morales. No idea. Nothing's been officially announced, so we have no clue, but that would be a very, very nice addition.
That'd be really welcome indeed. And because, given, the game's image quality, it looked completely fine too. So that's the kind of mode that I hope they can manage in the end. But even if not, probably even without RT reflections, a 60 FPS mode would still look really good.
Precisely, absolutely. And again, if Spider-Man's anything to go off of, it would be very consistent as well, because that was pretty much a locked 60. Even in the ray traced mode, it was very, very, very stable. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of what we can say for the moment. This is just a brief little preview. Don't want to spoil the full analysis, but I am looking forward. I will be covering that one, no doubt, because I think of everyone at DF, I'm probably the only one that's actually really played through these games.
Yeah, I mean, John, come on, let's be honest. Yeah. I haven't played through them.
I know. Yeah, exactly. But you can appreciate the technology. So
for sure, always
exactly. But yeah, anyway, thanks for joining me for this somewhat brief preview, Alex.
Anytime there, John.
And if you guys enjoyed it, as always, be sure to like and subscribe, ring that notification bell, check out our Patreon, which we've just revamped, and follow us over on Twitter. And until next time, John and Alex are signing off, and Alex is going to have to say,
Auf Wiedersehen.
There we go.